Good morning, viewers. Welcome to Frankly Speaking with Vibhuti Jha. As you are aware, my programs are always designed to address and cater to issues that dominate our daily lives, be it politics, religion, spirituality, raising consciousness, or economics, banking, and finance. We have talked about wars and we have talked about leadership. Today, I have a very special privilege of being in Los Angeles in the wonderful campus of Loyola Marymount University, where with me is a very dear friend of mine, Navin Doshi, who has established a chair for Indic studies in this campus. Tomorrow, there will be a program which will be a Bridge Builder Award for prominent people who have bridged the barriers of communication, relationships, and what have you. Considering that element, Navin will talk more about it. He has written several books. We will talk about them later. But today we will focus on one of the elements which is called consciousness, conscience, and spirituality. How Hindu philosophy, how Indic studies, the education needs to be imparted not only in universities but to the general public as well. So Navin, welcome to the program. Thank you for being with us today here. And share with me your impressions that Sanatan Dharma, as we are followers of Sanatan Dharma, what exactly is the message of Sanatan Dharma and how important it is for people to understand and appreciate this entire process, particularly when in the current world we are running through so many diverse conflicts in our society, driven by politics, religion, and what have you. So Navin, your thoughts on this matter of Sanatan Dharma. You have established a chair here. How will it convey, because education is key in this process. What inspired you to do that and to establish this study center? And tell us something more about the Bridge Builder Award that is being awarded.
All right. It's a very loaded question. Actually, there not just one question, but I think there are two or three in there. So let's see, if I start with saying that there are many paths to the mountaintop. Each one is unique, and anyone can take any path, any tradition, but the objective is the same, and the results are the same if acquired. I have written a book, Transcendence.
Right. And for the viewers' attention, this is a wonderful book. It's available on Amazon. We are not marketing it, but I want you to consider purchasing this book and reading it because the thoughts have been very, very well elucidated.
Okay. So having said that, and I also recall an article that I had written, and the article states that the same thing. Basically, there are many paths to the mountaintop. Each one is unique, but ensure that sometimes you have to kind of descend to go up to avoid some roadblocks or big rocks that you may have to. So idea is again the same thing. So I had expressed that in an article. I had written that, God knows what, 10 years back, on Gandhi's spirituality. And if you recall the movie Gandhi, Gandhi says, I am a Hindu, I am a Muslim, I am Jain, I am all of them. Just to give an impression that all of them carry equal status. It depends upon individual who would take any path that they want to take. The basic idea here is nature's nature is to create pairs of opposites within and without. One must learn to bring harmony, balance, and complementarity between the opposites for transcendence. and immanence. And autonomy, then comes subration, then you transcend from your needs for a higher and higher need, from need for the body to the need for the mind, poetry, philosophy. The highest state in nature, I would say, is to becoming philosophical. That, I believe, is right at the doorsteps of spirituality in nature.
Talking about nature, I will also try to talk about the contemporary dialogue on climate change.
Okay.
And the fact that there is an 80-20 ratio, 80-20 formula works every time.
I have it right here.
Yeah, and I've read the book, so
Okay,
there are certain things which we have
Yeah.
talked about it.
Yeah.
The point which I'm trying to drive at is
Right.
in the modern context.
Uh-huh.
You said earlier on that there are certain things that are regimented and rule-driven.
Right, right,
Hinduism, Sanatana Dharma is all about seeking.
right, right.
Most of the people are looking for help. What I find in Christianity and Islam is that people stipulate Jesus is the only way. Allah is supreme. Perfectly fine. And people then pray to Allah and Jesus as the solution to all their problems. And the prayer element comes in. In Hinduism, there is no such instruction. So when people come, they are still left with the thought, where am I going to get the answer from? The answer lies in nature. Because as you have rightly said, that nature has the bountiful element from gold, silver, diamond, food, what have you. Every life-sustaining force is in nature. Humans have destroyed nature. So how do we bring about the balance? You have established the chairs here as well as the UCLA, and the important part is education. Why have we Hindus not got into conveying the message that respecting nature and creating wealth from there, we are missing out on that?
Right. Let us see, we can distinguish two sets of philosophies, Eastern and Western. Western, also known as Abrahamic traditions, which includes Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. While Eastern traditions include Hinduism, Buddhism mostly, and their branches. Abrahamic traditions also has a certain attributes. It's also known as a tradition with so-called selfish God or insecure God, stated in different ways. My God is the only God. There is no other gods. That is the main distinction between the West and the East. And that also creates problems and tribalism instead of unity. I think the most important part of, if we were to follow that, remember I said about layered existence? And one needs to transcend from a layer to layer. So bridge building among even traditions could bring us a lot closer to the Supreme Being we call Brahman. The other thing, as I was talking about nature and the attributes of nature being layered. So we can learn from there. The most important attribute that I can think of is being equality. And that's what transcendence is to cultivate and transcend in ways that you feel becoming one with every human being, with nature, everything. You are one.
By virtue of the process of education and learning, because that's we are in the university, you have created this chair here, the study center, which is very, very laudable. and that is required. So I'm delighted that you are doing this, and in this university, and students are enrolled. We are in the professor's office here doing this recording. Stay with us. We'll come back to you soon after this short break.
Okay.
Welcome back. In this segment, we are going to talk about a very important element of our Hindu philosophy, the word sanskar. Everybody talks about sanskar, but there is no laid down thing about sanskar. It's a somatic practice of our learning. Because whatever we learn, if the body doesn't imbibe, it doesn't become actionable. And one of my most favorite examples, which Navin also attributed earlier on, about cycling. So think about it like this. Every one of us remembers our first day when we got behind the wheels of the car. It was such an excitement. At that time, there was a process. You get in the car, you put the ignition key, your foot is on the brake, otherwise the car will not start. And then you look to the left, to the right, adjust your mirrors, and then you look to the left and the right before you give the signal, and then you start. It's a very exciting, nervous moment when you take on. But today, after years of learning and practicing, when we become, the whole thing becomes and creates an automaticity in our bodies. It becomes an imbibed thing. And that's now we don't even consider all those processes that went into learning the driving of the car. So sanskar is that kind of a element for me, is that you establish practices from your learning and you implement it in your life. So Navin, I would like you to talk about how the sanskar gets established. But before we do that, I wanted to share with you, what Navin calls in his book Mahavakyas. The number one is, Mahavakyas is of the spiritual self, and he talks about Prajnanam Brahma, consciousness is Brahman. Tat Tvam Asi, we have heard these phrases before, heard these sayings before. Then Ayam Atman Brahma, and then Aham Brahma Asmi. Translated in English, Prajnanam Brahma is consciousness is Brahman. It's mentioned in the Rig Veda that individual mind represents the universal mind. Then Tat Tvam Asi, that thou art, is part of Samved. And then Ayam Atma Brahma, the total human self, is Brahman. And Aham Brahma Asmi, I am Brahman, which is part of Yajurveda. So this is a very deep philosophy, and this needs to be studied. So Navin, when you began all this, how did you come about establishing the practices in this manner? So tell us more about sanskar and consciousness leading to this.
Okay. Basically, it states that Atman and Brahman is one. The nature comes into picture, and it is a, shall I say, it's a game of life. So the idea of the game that God is playing is to transcend, to discover yourself, that you are indeed, you are not the body, you are not anything else, but you are Atman. Your true existence is unity, Atman, united with or part of Brahman. So that samskara is a positive, life-fulfilling spontaneity of the somatic self. So I have to first of all describe who we are. And if you recall, I said, like, compared, we are all the organisms and everything that we experience are layered like an onion. But basically we are constituted of the body and the mind.
When I talked about your thought of ancient wisdom to contemporary challenges, is that, do you think, I believe that we are not a religion. We are not even recognized as a religion the way it is understood. It is primarily between Christianity and Islam, then Judaism, Buddhism, Sikhism, and then there are Hindus. We were never called Hindus. We are Sanatan Dharmis actually. It's about eternal principles, universal principles. It's all in the nature. And the universal principles are, as one doctor once told me, that once a patient comes on the table, I don't give a damn what his name is
Right.
or what religion he belongs to, because cancer has no religion, ulcer has no religion, Alzheimer's has no religion. It affects people as a disease. Likewise, on a positive side of it, every parent loves their children. This is universal. Every parent wishes that the children do well, are safe, they don't have bad things happen to them, right? So this is the important part of education that we can share from our Hindu philosophy, and that education is key. Stay tuned with us. We'll come back to you right after this short break. Welcome back. In the third and final segment, we will talk about one very important element, is bringing up children. And this was especially a challenge for Indians because we have grown up in a particular social setup in India. Because of the socio-economic environment, parents always tell their children what to do and what not to do. And Navin, in his book, this new book, is A Light with No Shadows. He has devoted a whole chapter about bringing up children. So those of you who are interested, please do read. There are many rules, but I will highlight 2 rules for the paucity of time for the television part of it. But 2 rules are very important, and I want to read it to you, and then we will discuss that. One of them is, never ever stop communicating. Maintaining a strong link between you and your children is establishing strong roots in relationships. And the other one is, look for the positive in your children and don't talk about the negatives in kids. Always encourage the positive and discourage the negative. Now, these are 2 very important principles, along with 7, 8, 9 of them in this. So let's talk about the communication and the good and the bad part of it. As humans, none of us are perfect. Nobody is perfect. So as a result of which, we often are very harsh with ourselves and our children that, look, why aren't you as good in maths as somebody else's son is? The simple answer to that, I realized, was maybe I have not passed on that genetic code of mine from me to him, or the 32 elements that have gone to him. He didn't get that. So he's not good in maths, but he has a strength of his own. That's why the saying that God gives, everybody has a God-given talent. The question is, when do we identify that? And that's why it is important to understand your child and your children, to focus on their strength, not on their weakness. Weaknesses people overcome. Strength, if you don't utilize, you don't achieve your full potential then. The other one was communication. So let's discuss these 2 things. Is that how do we identify that my child, which is my most precious creation, achieves his or her full potential? How do we go about that? And you can share your experience.
Yeah. You see, he didn't go into a little bit deeper. I want you to quote Khalil Gibran.
Khalil Gibran. Okay, let me just look up that.
Yeah. See, basically, what the tendency is, and specifically in India.
Yeah, talking about, since Navin mentioned about what Khalil Gibran says in this book called The Prophet, your children are not your children. They come through you, but not from you. Though they are with you, yet they belong not to you.
And that is precisely the problem in Indian families, certainly in India and often here. Communication is one way to bridge the gap. You must communicate, but you let them make the decision. Never ever. Remember I said about autonomy for transcendence? So that comes certainly between father and a son, or a father and a daughter, or parents and the children. Autonomy of any organism, any organization, anything that you can think of, any layer you can think of, is an extremely important thing to discover yourself and and learn from your own experiences if that is what is necessary. Yes, read, learn other people's experiences, but you do it yourself, not because your father or mother said so.
And one of the things that is very important is that wisdom comes from learning. Wisdom comes from experience. And, we can always deduce something to our own life. So Navin, coming back to the contemporary part, one of the things that I often hear, and mostly, all of us hear, is the fact that people say we must have religious tolerance for everybody. And English language, the way we know it, tolerance is not doesn't have a positive connotation. Tolerance is, okay, I have to tolerate you, that means I have to live with it. No choice basis. But the moment we shift the dialogue from tolerance to respect and acceptance, that's what namaste means. As creation of God, we are just the same. Identical body parts performing identical functions, even if not exactly the same. So the question here is that why don't we start using that not religious tolerance but religious acceptance of others as they are? Any thought on that?
From that very important rule of our existence, nature is dynamic. Nature is not absolute. Hindsight is 20/20, but nature is 80/20. What does that mean? Nature is not linear. 80/20 implies that it's not linear, or rarely linear. Everything is changing. Even truth is relative. I think Jainism has expressed very well. Anikvada or something like that. Mm-hmm. Truth is like a diamond having multiple faces, each one pretty when you look at it. Or the blind man of Hindustan. They express in essence, in one story, they express what really the nature is. Nature is always changing. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
No, you're saying very correctly because we all live in nature.
Right.
Truth is one. Sun rises in the east is the truth. That angle changes is a part of the rotation.
Yes. So when you say truth.
Continuing our dialogue, I have great pleasure in welcoming Professor Chris Chapple. He is Doshi Professor of Indic and Comparative Theology. Chris is a very interesting person. He's heading the India Studies group here, kind of thing, if I may say so, in theological part. So Chris, please tell us all that how did you decide to become professor in this field? And prior to the recording, you were commenting on my tie, the symmetry of it, and you showed amazing depth and knowledge of our philosophy. So I am sure that you have embraced Hindu philosophy or Sanatana philosophy, consciousness, spirituality, and you didn't have to change your religion for whatever practice you do. So tell our viewers and share your rich experience.
Okay.
And it will be a real pleasure to have that from you.
Right. Well, the 1960s were quite a moment of culture change in America and throughout the world. And it trickled down into school curricula. And in my high school, in 9th grade, we studied India for a full 10 weeks, almost an hour every day. We studied China and Japan for 10 weeks. We studied Africa for 10 weeks. We studied Latin America for 10 weeks. And I knew from that point forward, when I was, 13 years old, that the cultures of the world really captured my interest and captured my imagination. I began a Zen practice at that time, and I also began to learn how to do the physical aspects of yoga. When I went off to university, I studied my very first semester Sanskrit. I did depth studies in Africa, Latin American studies, studied Spanish. Also, I started the study of Tibetan. And in completing my undergraduate degree in comparative literature with a focus on Sanskrit and on Tibetan, and in religious studies, primarily the study of Hinduism and Buddhism, I realized that a whole world became available that required further studies at the doctoral level. So simultaneously, during those early years of development, I began studying with a woman from Calcutta who had started a small ashram, a small community in the yoga tradition. By this time, I was living on Long Island, and for 12 years with this community, we built a restaurant, we built a bookstore, we had an art gallery, we put on plays, we had a whole musical component, a lot of creativity. And then eventually, as I rose in the professoriate, I saw that there was a need, particularly in the 1990s when interest in yoga revived. There was a need for people to, again, understand the philosophy, understand the language. And I had the good fortune of meeting Navin Doshi during those years through a professor who I had brought over from India, from Gujarat University, Professor Yajneshwar Shastri, who taught for us many years, coming in the summers and occasionally during the school year. His wife taught Sanskrit and the Upanishads. She also was a professor of Sanskrit in particular. And this caused us to, through our outreach to the growing yoga community, to begin first some small lectures, eventually formal certificates. And the first certificate was in yoga philosophy, where our students, yoga teachers and leaders of the yoga movement in Los Angeles, would study Sanskrit for 20 hours, they would study the Yoga Sutra for 10 hours, they would study the Upanishads with the founder of the Venkateshwara temple here, the Malibu temple, for 10 hours, Bhagavad Gita, Sankhikarika, and then they explored different aspects of Buddhism, different aspects of goddess traditions for a total of 120 hours. Then we began yoga therapy, the teaching of yoga in schools. We had yoga and ecology, which became yoga, mindfulness, and social change. And by the time of the late O's, 2008, 2009, we had trained hundreds and hundreds of people. And the university said, well, perhaps you could think about a graduate program. So we implemented in 2014 the continent's first Master of Arts in Yoga Studies. We're on the verge of enrolling our 7th cohort. We also have approval from our accrediting agency for this next year to have a low residency option where people come for a short time to LMU, then they study streaming and archived, interacting with the professors for 2 semesters, then travel to India with all of the rest of the group, and we're in the company of the International Summer School for Jain Studies. And we meet with Jain Munis, we hear from the nuns and the monks, the teachers and the lay people of that tradition, vis-a-vis their particular way of thinking about and enacting yoga. And then they come back, they stream more, they study Hatha Yoga texts, they study the Bhagavad Gita in greater detail, they study all of the different modern movement schools in addition to their study of Sanskrit. They study the health aspects and benefits, the linkages between yoga and Ayurveda. And then after either 2 or 3 years of study, they become qualified to declare themselves to have a Master of Arts in Yoga Studies.
That's brilliant.
And the students are doing great work.
I'm sure they are. I mean, this is something like they're accepting to learn something new and different. That's so powerful. Do you offer these courses and programs online as well?
We do. Okay. Starting in the fall, we will enroll people really from all over the world. And they will be tuning in online, and they will also, all of the students have access to the archive of the live lectures.
Brilliant. I was talking to Navin earlier on, and one of the things that talking about the contemporary scenario and ancient wisdom, the one other thought that comes to my mind, and I talked with Navin at length about it, is that in our modern language, everything that we say and do is communicated through languages, whether silently or through words. Somehow, somewhere along the line, the current dialogue is about let's be tolerant about others. We are talking about religious tolerance. I find it very objectionable to myself, in my opinion. I believe that tolerance is having to live with it on a no-choice basis. That is self-defeating. So, as an academic, why can't we introduce the concept of respect and acceptance?
Exactly.
And
right. I mean, the English word tolerate, like I will tolerate you. And the word tolerant is a little bit more gentle. And what we as scholars do, but particularly through the Doshi Bridge Builder Award, is that we invite people in from different disciplines to share their wisdom, sometimes in the musical field, sometimes in the historical field, in the philosophical field, in the health sciences field. And it's all about learning. It's all about engaging in the process of communication. And one of the really recurring themes within the panoply of what's available in Indian philosophy, which is highly, highly diverse, is to have the conversation, to be willing to ask hard questions, to not just simply accept things at face value, but to probe a little bit more deeply, to truly cultivate a discerning process through which we can sift out ourselves and be open and, as you say, be accepting of others, not from a place of supercilious, like, oh, of course I have it all together and you can do what you want, but from a place rather of having listened, having heard the perspective of another, and then in that quiet space, accepting that, yeah, okay, it's all right, that this is the practice or this is the view that I have. And, of course, people, each and every one of them, will have their own distinct perspective.
so from amongst your student group, people are definitely from other faiths, other belief systems. And so please share with me and the audience today is that, and that is, if it is objectionable, but it's more from the point of view of learning, even if somebody is sensitive towards that. Because in Christianity, the phrase goes along, Jesus is the only way. In Islam, Allah is supreme. There is nothing like that in Indic philosophy. You know, you are who you are. Yeah. So if students from those communities and those faiths are there, how do they respond to this learning? Because this will directly come into creating a universal application
well, here's
of the thought process.
Right, here's where learning is so beautiful. And I had two young Saudi Arabian women in class. And what they did was, as they looked at yoga and as they analyzed the moves of yoga, they began to recognize that the humility of the bow that is so central to really the implementation of asana is so close to the process, the very physical process of prayer within Islam. And in fact, yoga is being widely practiced through Turkey, through Saudi Arabia, through all of the Muslim countries. And it's because what yoga provides is a very real, a very physical connection that brings us into that universal place of humility that allows us to connect with something larger than ourselves. So also with the Christians, within even the Jesuit movement, there's now what's called Ignatian Yoga. And when we think of Jesus, or we think of what technically in the field of Christology is the nature of the Christ, that can be defined in so many different ways. And many Christian theologians talk about incarnationalism, talk about the presence of the divinity within each and everything, within each and every experience. And in this somewhat universal, although it remains particular way, we see a commonality where people can actually sit in silence, find through understanding a place of acceptance. And that's the ground for an abiding peace, rather than the cogitative, argumentative, but stepping back and finding that place of quiet.
That said, I would like you to also share with our audiences what is this Bridge Builder Award, and how did you hit upon this idea of bridge builder? Because bridge building is a real exercise.
Right.
In military as well as civilian work,
Right.
you connect to ends where there was no possible connection.
Exactly.
So how did you hit upon the idea of this one? And tell us about the Bridge Builder Award.
Well, Navin and Doshi came up with this idea some years ago, and they said, we have so many different ways in which people disconnect. Let's look at ways in which people connect. Let's look at ways in which people make bridges. And over the years, we have consulted and we have found remarkable people who have been willing to come to campus, willing to share their wisdom, willing to share their talent. And we started with Deepak Chopra, who we all know from CNN and his many books and public appearances. And he was so articulate about his own story of showing up in an emergency room and not quite knowing the protocols, but gradually finding how to take his medical training as well as culture training in India and translate it in a way that has been of benefit to so many people. We also invited Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh, and Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh scripted the end of the Vietnam War. Again, a peacemaker of the highest order. Zubin Mehta, who had brought his orchestra, brought his skill to the Middle East and created an orchestra that included both Israelis and Palestinians making music together, showing that peace truly is possible. We have Vandana Shiva, the great advocate for improved agricultural practices. So many different people, and again, people who have taken the time in their own lives to extend through their talents out into the world to bring peace, and outer peace and inner peace. And we look forward to many more in the future.
Yeah, that's brilliant, because one of the things which I, sometimes the biggest management lesson that I learned, we often ignore, is when you fly. One of the nicest lessons I learned. How many times have we really paid attention to the security and the details that the air hostesses, air crew gives you? I never paid attention to that, but until one day it just hit me hard that when the cabin pressure falls, the oxygen mask will drop.
Right.
First put it on yourself before you help others.
Right.
That led to my coming to the understanding, if I'm not fit enough, how the hell can I help anybody else?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So likewise, in this process of learning, as the saying goes, it's very important for us to understand that we are all the same.
Exactly.
We are all one.
We're all human.
We are all human. And universal principles are same. Every parent loves his children. They only wish well for them. And on the doctor's table, nobody knows what is the religion of a particular disease. So why do we fight over religion so much? That's my inquiry.
Yeah.
Why
Well,
do we?
it's the perennial question. And what the yogis say is that there is a simmering moha, a simmering state of confusion that, if unexamined, leads us into unending states of affliction. But that we, like the Buddha, the awakened one, as humans, we have the capacity to wake up from that stupor. And through yoga, through conversation, through discernment, through education. We can gather the tools of refinement that will allow us, hopefully first by example, but then by sharing, that we will be able to go into that state of awakening. And I'd like to recall an interview I saw once where the Dalai Lama told a story. And he went to the company of the Queen Mother, who was over 100 years old, of very good sound health and of good mind, and she lived all of the 20th century.
Oh, wow.
And he said to her, "Queen Mother, tell me, you have seen it all. You saw the First World War, you saw the Great Depression, you saw the Second World War, you saw the Cold War, all these things that are history to so many of us,
right.
You lived. Tell me, Queen Mother, are things getting worse?" And without hesitating, she said, "No, we learn lessons and we improve. Things are better." So I think there is some hope in her message.
Queen
Right.
Mother, Queen of?
Queen Mother, this is the mother of Queen Elizabeth.
Ah,
Yeah.
British. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, that's true. I mean, but you know, we humans are very difficult kind of people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Difficult kind of people, as the saying goes in one of my favorite movies, Batman Begins.
Yeah.
Oh no, Sherlock Holmes actually.
Okay, Sherlock Holmes.
When
another good movie.
Professor
Yeah.
Moriarty
Mm-hmm.
tells Sherlock at a particular point in time in the dialogue that the human mind is so full of conflicts. It enjoys conflicts.
Yeah.
It all matters whether you're supplying bandages or bullets.
Mm-hmm.
So we evolved, but wars have not ended.
Right.
It has changed dimension. It's much more dangerous now.
Yeah.
So what will that be a kind of apocalypse happening here? Armageddon, as the famous saying
Well,
goes.
it's sort of
we are
interesting.
on a path
yeah.
of self-destruction right now.
It's interesting because with all of the turmoil, both socially and even climatically, there is yet a conscience and a conscientiousness that struggles. And I don't see happening, and hopefully I'm not incorrect, but if we reflect on so many tens of millions of people that were slaughtered in the First World War and in the Second World War, I don't see that happening, partly because of media, partly because we can identify very quickly if there's trouble, and change can occur.
Do we have a program in the university to teach the politicians to get rid of this politics of hate and revenge?
Yeah.
It is the modern, everybody, because political leadership, unfortunately, impacts the social life.
Yeah. Well, the way that I see it is that, as the great philosopher Panini stated, first there's a little bit of human desire, and then it becomes a word, and then that word becomes an action. And we've become quite vigilant to make sure that our actions are not killing. If we look at the effects of Mahatma Gandhi, of Martin Luther King Jr., of the overthrow of the Marcos regime, these nonviolent movements have been very, very effective. What we are now, and we know, having seen all of the Holocaust movies, been through all the movies about the horrors of World War II, we know we don't want that. And now what we're doing, we've pulled back to that place of voice. And yes, we're seeing all these ugly words that are broadcast that I never grew up with, words of insult, words of hurt. And I think that as we're exposed to that, the discernment will come that, oh no, we don't want to hit people anymore. Hopefully the next phase will be we don't want to insult people anymore. And then maybe we'll really become people of peace.
Well, destruction and creation happen simultaneously, like World Trade
Lord
Center
Shiva.
went down, a new World Trade Center came up.
Yeah.
Well, as I always say, that every disaster is an opportunity for someone. So
Yeah.
the question is here now is that we are in a phase in our world right now that we are just a trigger away from some catastrophe or the other, and we do not know how the rest will respond or react to that. And therefore, with the spread of knowledge and awareness, as you rightly said, that the word becomes, multiplied. The multiplier effect is faster than ever before.
Right.
Everybody is an editor in 140 characters on Twitter,
Right.
and and on WhatsApp, wild messages go through all over the place.
Right.
How to bring consciousness in that uncivil dialogue, as I call
Yeah.
it?
And this is where Facebook is now self-regulating. India is really going after the danger potential in WhatsApp. And we have so many instances of misinformation that we now understand was misinformation, that people will rise to the occasion of developing a critical mind, developing a discerning mind, and not let the emotions be stirred up quite so much. And we have a long way to go, a very, very long way to go.
We have a long way to go, and the time is up. What I wanted to say, thank you again for joining us, and have a great weekend. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Navin, for this wonderful initiative that both of you are leading. I hope you generate more multiplier effect and have many more centers like this around the globe.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.